It was a crisp Friday morning, March 14, 2003, in the small town of Wallkill, New York. The day began like any other, quiet, predictable, safe. But before the sun had set, that peace would shatter. 20-year-old Megan McDonald, a college student known for her bright smile and down-to-earth kindness, was missing. She hadn't shown up for her shift at the local restaurant, something completely out of character for her. Friends called, coworkers checked in, no one heard back. Megan was the youngest daughter of a retired NYPD homicide detective, a man who had dedicated his life to bringing justice to others. But now, his own family would find themselves at the center of a mystery that would take over 2 decades to unravel. That evening, police discovered Megan's white Mercury Sable abandoned in a parking lot at an apartment complex. Her purse, phone, and keys were still inside. Nothing appeared stolen, no broken glass, just silence. The next day, the search came to an unthinkable end. A passerby stumbled upon a body on a secluded dirt path off Bowser Road, just a few miles from where her car was left. It was Megan. The medical examiner ruled that she'd been beaten with a blunt object. The attack was personal, deliberate. There were no signs of robbery or assault. Whoever did this didn't want her money. They wanted her gone. And from that day forward, one question has haunted investigators and Megan's family alike. Who could have done this, and why? Blank. To find the truth, detectives began retracing Megan's final 24 hours. At around 9 a.m. on March 13, the morning before she vanished, Megan's landlord reported hearing a man inside her apartment. That man turned out to be her new boyfriend, a local guy she'd recently started seeing. According to him, Megan dropped him off at his place around 10 a.m. that, he told police, was the last time he ever saw her. Later that day, Megan clocked in for her shift at the American Cafe inside the Galleria Mall. By all accounts, it was just a normal day. She laughed with coworkers, waited tables, and left the restaurant that evening without any sign that something was wrong. At around 7 p.m., Megan pulled up to a house party nearby. Witnesses say she didn't go inside. Instead, she stayed in her car, chatting with a few people outside. When they invited her in, she politely declined. She said she didn't want to go inside because her ex-boyfriend, Ed Holly, was there. Megan had recently broken up with Ed, and it hadn't ended well. He was older, known around town, and the relationship had been intense. She made it clear she wanted distance. So she told her friends she'd rather meet up with some people from Middletown, her hometown about 20 miles away. Later that night, Megan drove to her best friend's house in Middletown. They ordered takeout, watched an episode of Friends, and laughed like they always did. But as the night went on, Megan seemed restless. Around midnight, she made several phone calls trying to buy some marijuana, but none of her usual contacts were available. Before she left, she told her friends she was heading straight home. She had work the next morning. But Megan didn't go home. Instead, sometime after midnight, she returned to that same party she'd avoided earlier. Witnesses there say she stayed for only a few minutes before leaving again. The last confirmed sighting came just after 12:20 a.m., when she stopped by a house on Cindy Lane. The man living there, Andre Thurston, later told police Megan pulled up, and he got into her car. They talked briefly. She asked him if he had any marijuana. He said no. Megan reportedly sighed and said she'd just get it from Ed. Minutes later, around 12:30 a.m., a resident at the nearby Kensington Manor Apartments reported hearing loud music outside. Looking out her window, she saw Megan's white Mercury Sable pulling into the lot, followed closely by a dark-colored car. The engines revved, the music blared, and then, silence. That small detail, a car following closely behind, would become one of the most important clues in the case. Sometime between 12:30 a.m. and sunrise, police believe Megan was attacked in her car. Her killer struck her repeatedly, then drove the vehicle back to that same apartment complex. By 8 a.m., Megan's car sat parked in the lot again, this time quiet and still. It never moved after that. By 2 p.m., multiple witnesses confirmed seeing the Mercury in the same spot. Days passed. The car stayed there, untouched. And Megan's life had been taken. Blank. As the investigation began, police focused on a short list of people close to her: friends, boyfriends, exes. The crime felt too personal to be random. And one name quickly rose to the top: Edward "Ed" Hawley. The ex-boyfriend Megan had tried to avoid the night she vanished. Ed wasn't a stranger to investigators. He'd been questioned early on, even multiple times over the years. He denied everything, but his story had gaps. He admitted Megan had helped him buy a used 1990 purple Honda Civic hatchback, a small car with a massive sound system so loud that people said you could hear it coming from blocks away. According to friends, Megan had loaned Ed money. He claimed just a few $100s. Others said it was closer to $3. Either way, the debt had caused tension. Megan was financially stable. After her father's passing, she received small monthly checks from his NYPD pension and worked part-time at the mall restaurant. She was responsible, organized, and rarely overdrafted her account. But on March 10, just 4 days before her death, her bank statement showed an overdraft of nearly $900, the first time that had ever happened. Police theorized that Megan had cut off contact with Ed shortly before her death. But that night, after running out of options, she might have reached out one last time, for something as simple as a favor or a conversation. And if Ed really was the man in the dark-colored car following her, everything might have gone terribly wrong after that moment. Investigators believed jealousy, anger, and money could all have played a role. But as they dug deeper, another man's name surfaced: Polly Simpson, Megan's ex before Ed. He'd dated her for 2 years. And though they broke up in 2002, they stayed in touch. In fact, he was the last person Megan tried calling that night, around 12:20 a.m., just minutes before she was last seen. The call went to voicemail. Polly told police that he and Megan had argued in the past, sometimes loudly, but insisted they'd remained friends. His DNA was found on a cigar butt inside Megan's car, but no one could determine when it had been left there. And yet, there was something else. Polly had access to a dark-colored car, too. His friend's girlfriend owned a black Dodge Neon, and the night Megan disappeared, that car was in circulation. When police later collected samples from the Neon, they noticed what appeared to be stains on the rearview mirror. But for reasons no one could explain, those samples were never tested. It was one of many investigative missteps that would haunt the case for years to come. For now, all detectives could do was hold on to what little they knew: 2 ex-boyfriends, 1 witness, and a dark car that trailed Megan into the night. What they didn't know then was that this tangled web of jealousy, debt, and silence would stretch on for 2 decades, and still leave them wondering who really ended Megan McDonald's life on that lonely road in Wallkill. The small town of Wallkill didn't forget. For months after Megan McDonald's passing, her photo hung in shop windows, her name printed on flyers pinned to telephone poles. People whispered theories at diners and gas stations. Everyone had a guess, but no one had answers. And as the years passed, the case grew colder, buried under time, rumors, and frustration. Police had 2 main suspects: Edward "Ed" Hawley, the ex-boyfriend with the loud purple Honda Civic, and Polly Simpson, another ex who'd once been close to her circle of friends. Both had motives, both had connections, and both denied everything. But investigators couldn't shake the feeling that Megan had known her killer, someone she trusted, someone close enough to get inside her car that night. Ed was older, in his early 20s when he dated Megan. 2 friends. He seemed charming, confident, even a little flashy. He liked cars, music, and being noticed. That purple Honda Civic hatchback was his pride and joy, fitted with a sound system so loud you could feel the bass shake the street before you even saw him coming. When police first questioned him, Ed insisted he had nothing to do with Megan's death. He said their breakup had been mutual, that they'd simply drifted apart. But investigators noticed a few details that didn't line up. For one, money. Megan had loaned him cash for the Honda, reportedly around $3. Ed claimed it was only $300. Either way, he hadn't paid her back. Friends said she was frustrated. Detectives believed that financial tension may have become a spark for something darker. And then there was the night itself. Witnesses saw Megan's white Mercury Sable being followed by a dark-colored car near the Kensington Manor apartments. Ed's car, a 1990 dark purple Honda Civic, matched that description. It was a detail police could never quite shake. Still, there wasn't enough hard evidence to charge him. No fingerprints, no confession, no witnesses who could place him at the scene during those critical early morning hours. If Ed was the loud, confident type, Polly was the opposite, quiet, moody, a bit unpredictable. He and Megan had dated from 2000 to 2002. Even after breaking up, they stayed connected through mutual friends. In fact, the night she disappeared, she'd been hanging out with his sister. Investigators described their relationship as volatile. Arguments, short breakups, and quick makeups. Polly admitted they'd fought before, even slapped each other during heated moments. But he swore he'd never seriously hurt her. Still, there were reasons to look his way. For one, he was the last person Megan called before she vanished, around 12:20 a.m., just minutes before her final sighting. She dialed his number. It went to voicemail. And then there was the car, that black Dodge Neon. It wasn't his, but belonged to his friend's girlfriend. He had access to it that night. Police later found what appeared to be trace evidence inside the vehicle. But for reasons no one could ever explain, the samples were never tested for DNA. Even stranger, Polly's girlfriend's father was a police officer, and she worked as a secretary at the same Kensington Manor apartments where Megan's car was found. That connection blurred the lines between friend, suspect, and coincidence. When police questioned Polly, they noted that his hands were red and swollen, and he had a small cut on his face. He said it was from a skin condition. They never followed up. He also claimed to have an alibi. Between 11 p.m. and 12:30 a.m., he said he was at a local bar in Middletown. After that, he called a cab to his girlfriend's house, ate something, spoke to her sister, and never left. Both women backed him up. With that, investigators ruled him out, at least officially. The timeline was a mess. Witnesses gave conflicting statements about what night they'd heard music or seen the two cars. One woman said it was March 15th. Later, she corrected herself, it must have been the early hours of the 14th. That change shifted everything. If she was right, then both cars, Megan's white Mercury and that dark one behind it, were seen just before the time detectives believed the attack happened. And the more investigators tried to piece things together, the more it unraveled. The lack of tested evidence, the conflicting alibis, the personal connections between suspects and witnesses. It all made the case incredibly hard to pin down. In 2008, 5 years after Megan's death, a local defense attorney named David Hoover walked into the district attorney's office with information that stunned investigators. Hoover said he represented a man who wanted to talk about Megan McDonald's case. His client, he claimed, had knowledge that only the killer, or someone who'd been there, could possibly know. That man was reportedly Andre Thurston, the same person who told police he'd been in Megan's car briefly that night. The man she'd asked about marijuana before saying she'd go see Ed Holly. According to Hoover, Andre told him the weapon used in Megan's murder was a ball-peen hammer, a detail that had never been made public. Over the next several days, Hoover and prosecutors discussed a possible deal, information in exchange for leniency. But before anything was finalized, Andre died of an overdose. just 1 week after the anniversary of Megan's death. The deal, and any hope of answers, died with him. Blank, underscore, blank. For years, the case stagnated. Detectives kept returning to the same small circle of suspects, re-interviewing witnesses, running new tests, and hoping new forensic technology might finally crack it. But there was another complication, one that no one outside law enforcement knew about. In 2013, that same attorney, David Hoover, the man who once represented Andre, was elected district attorney. Behind the scenes, state police officers working the case grew uneasy. They suspected that Hoover's past connection to a man tied to the murder was quietly undermining the investigation. Reports later suggested that officers asked Hoover multiple times to step away from the case, but he allegedly refused. So, while the investigation dragged on, trust between the police and the DA's office began to crumble. Blank, underscore, blank. By the 2020s, 2 decades had passed. New detectives inherited the file, a mountain of interviews, timelines, and theories. Then, in 2023, after 20 years of waiting, they finally made their move. Using cell phone records, new forensic testing, and old witness statements, they built a timeline placing Megan, Ed, and Andre together at the same key locations the night she vanished. It was enough to bring charges. That year, state police arrested Edward Hawley, the ex-boyfriend who'd always been at the center of suspicion. By then, Hawley was in his 40s and paralyzed from the waist down after a car crash years earlier. He was already behind bars on an unrelated charge when detectives served him with the arrest warrant. The charge: murder in the second degree. Hawley denied everything, insisting he'd been unfairly targeted for decades. His defense claimed there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, no DNA, no fingerprints, and no eyewitness who could say he was there when Megan was killed. But prosecutors believed they finally had the pieces that fit. Still, even with new evidence and a suspect in custody, the road to justice for Megan McDonald was far from over. Because what happened next would shock everyone: investigators, the community, even Megan's own family. After 22 years, when the case finally went to trial, it all fell apart in the courtroom. 2 decades of waiting, 22 years of searching, hoping, and grieving, all leading to one courtroom in Orange County, New York. It was spring of 2025 when Edward, Ed, Hawley, the man long suspected in Megan McDonald's murder, finally faced a jury. For Megan's family, it felt like the end of a nightmare, and maybe the beginning of peace. But the truth was, the nightmare wasn't over. By now, the story was known across the Hudson Valley. Megan McDonald, the 20-year-old daughter of a retired NYPD detective, had been found dead on a dirt road outside Wallkill back in 2003. The case had haunted investigators for 2 decades, until 2023, when Hawley was charged. At the heart of the prosecution's argument were 3 motives: jealousy, money, and betrayal. They claimed Megan's breakup with Hawley had angered him. He still owed her money for that purple Honda Civic, the one she helped him buy, and she had started cutting him out of her life completely. On the night of March 13, she had been trying to get marijuana, but everyone else had turned her down. Desperate, she reached out to Ed, her ex, the man she was avoiding. Prosecutors painted a grim picture of what happened next. They said that Megan picked up Andre Thurston, the man who later told police he'd seen her that night, and together they drove to meet Ed. The 3 of them allegedly ended up at a secluded spot near Bowser Road. There, according to the state's theory, Hawley lost control. He learned Megan had called her former boyfriend, Paulie, Simpson. Earlier that night, investigators said jealousy flared, words were exchanged, and things turned violent. In their version, Ed attacked Megan from the back seat of her own car. The medical examiner found bruising on her neck, consistent with choking, and her skull showed at least 24 blunt force impacts. Her phone and car both had traces of Hawley's DNA. according to the prosecution, and her vehicle was later abandoned at the same apartment complex near his home. That, they said, was no coincidence. But Holly's defense team told a very different tale. They argued that Ed had been the perfect scapegoat, a man with a checkered past and a bad reputation, dragged back into the spotlight by investigators desperate for closure. They reminded jurors that the physical evidence against Holly was circumstantial. There were no fingerprints on the weapon. No eyewitness saw him with Megan that night. No video, no direct proof tying him to the scene of the attack. And they brought up something the jury couldn't ignore: the other suspect, Polly Simpson. The defense called attention to the untested evidence from the black Dodge Neon, the car Polly's friend's girlfriend owned. They pointed out how samples taken from that vehicle, possibly blood or tissue, had never been examined. They questioned why Polly's swollen hands and facial cut from the day after the murder had been brushed off as a skin condition. They even highlighted the web of personal connections, how Polly's girlfriend's father was a police officer, and how she worked at the very apartment complex where Megan's car was discovered. To the defense, it looked like the investigation had been compromised from the beginning: messy, emotional, and biased. And then came another revelation that unsettled the courtroom. The former district attorney, David Hoover, the same man who'd once represented Andre Thurston, a man allegedly tied to the crime, had been overseeing the case for years before stepping aside. The defense suggested this was a serious conflict of interest, possibly affecting the integrity of the entire investigation. It was enough to make jurors uneasy. Over several weeks, witnesses took the stand: detectives, forensic experts, and old friends of Megan's. Some cried, some couldn't remember, others seemed uncertain after so many years. The prosecution emphasized the small details: the cell phone data placing Megan, Ed, and Andre near the same locations that night, the dark-colored car seen trailing her white Mercury Sable, the unexplained overdraft in her bank account, a sign, they said, that Ed's unpaid debt had pushed her over the edge financially. But the defense chipped away at every piece of that puzzle. They argued the phone records weren't exact, that location data could only place a person within a general area, not prove who was in the car or what happened there. They pointed out that the witness who saw the two cars couldn't be sure of the color, or even the exact date. And when it came to the DNA evidence, the results were described as inconclusive. Yes, traces of Holly's DNA were found on Megan's phone in the back of the driver's seat, but he had been in her car before. They had dated. It wasn't proof of guilt, the defense argued. In closing arguments, Holly's lawyer turned to the jury and said, "You can't convict a man because it feels like he might have done it. You convict on evidence, and they don't have it." After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. Megan's family sat in the courtroom, silent, holding hands. For them, it had been 22 years of waiting. They'd lost her once. They couldn't bear to lose justice. 2 hours passed, then days. The jurors sent out notes. They wanted to review testimony, phone logs, and police statements. They asked for copies of the crime scene photos, the witness transcripts, even the call records between Megan and her exes. But despite reviewing nearly everything, they couldn't agree. Some believed the circumstantial evidence pointed clearly to Holly. Others said there was too much doubt, too many holes in the story. And finally, after days of deadlock, the judge made the call: a mistrial. For Megan's family, it was devastating. 2 decades, countless interviews, modern technology, and still no closure. Holly's legal team declared victory, claiming the prosecution had built a house of cards. Investigators, meanwhile, vowed to retry the case. In October 2025, a second trial was scheduled. The state still believed they had the right man, and this time, they promised, they'd make the evidence impossible to ignore. But the mistrial left a shadow. It raised a question no one wanted to say out loud. What if they didn't have the right person at all? Blank, _blank. The tragedy of Megan McDonald's story isn't just the crime itself, it's the decades of confusion, the missed evidence, and the haunting silence that followed. Her friends still remember her as a kind, hard-working young woman who loved her family and had dreams far bigger than her small town. Her case stands as a painful reminder that even with technology, resources, and time, justice can still slip through the cracks. And for the people of Wallkill, the question remains: was Megan's killer caught, or still out there, waiting, as the truth sits just beyond reach?